Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see the participant numbers climbing up, so we'll just give it another minute to let folks join, and then we'll start. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a special event today, UK's Global Perspectives in the Workplace. This is a very exciting event that has been put together by folks in the Office for the Vice President of Student Success and the UK International Centre. And we're very pleased to collaborate on this event, which we hope will showcase the importance of a global mindset in today's business world, and also help students amongst the audience find some connections and do a little bit of learning, but also some networking. So my name is Sue Roberts. I'm a professor here at UK, but I'm also Associate Provost for Internationalization. And I lead the International Centre on campus. And I'll be one of the co-moderators for this afternoon's discussion with our three panelists. Let me introduce our other co-moderator, or have her introduce herself, and that's Dr. Trisha Clement-Montgomery.
Hello, everyone. So yes, my name is Trisha Clement-Montgomery, and my supervisor, Vice President Kirsten Turner, couldn't be with us tonight. So I am here representing student success. I serve as the Dean of Students here at the University of Kentucky, which really gives me the opportunity to engage with students on all perspectives. And so this topic in particular is extremely important to me, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists tonight. That said, I think this is a good opportunity to probably turn it over to our panelists and have them do introductions of themselves. Let's start with Bryan.
Thank you, Trisha. Thank you, Sue. Thank you to everyone at the University of Kentucky for putting on this exciting event. My name is Bryan Lawless. I'm a native of Lexington, Kentucky through and through. I've been a UK Wildcats fan from day one, and I'm here representing Alltech today. Alltech, for those of you who may not know, the problem we try to solve as a company is we know that it's really difficult for animals to get proper nutrition. So Alltech makes things like prebiotics, probiotics, different trace minerals for animals so that they can be healthier, so that they can be stronger, and so that we can have a smaller carbon footprint. And so our company is in 120 plus countries. We have a global staff of about 5,000. And my responsibility in particular, I serve as one of our global marketing managers. And across our 120 countries, we have about 200 people in our marketing department, and less than half of those are from the United States. So my roles and my responsibilities are working across a lot of different time zones with a lot of different cultures and backgrounds of folks. It's extremely fun, it's extremely rewarding, and I look forward to sharing some of the learnings that I've had and connecting with some of our other panelists on that. So thank you so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Bryan, thank you so much for that introduction. At this time, we would love for Karen Thomas to share a little bit about herself and her company.
I would love to share. Can you all hear me? Okay, perfect. So hi, everyone. I'm Karen Thomas. I am based out of Louisville, but don't hold that against me because I am also a UK fan and a UK grad twice over. I loved it so much. I work for Yum Brands. You may not be familiar with Yum Brands, but you are probably familiar with the actual brands. KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and we own Habit Burger based out of California. We are located in over 150 different countries. We have over 1.5 million team members worldwide, so definitely have that global footprint and serving over 40 million customers a day. For me specifically, I am responsible for recruiting for Yum Corp. We house ourselves roughly around 700 employees, the majority based in Louisville. We have some based in Texas, and then we do also have Yum employees based all over the globe within those different countries that we're operating within. So I'm responsible for recruiting great talent to our organization. So I'm very glad to be speaking to everyone today. And I'm also responsible for the internship program that we also offer as well. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Karen. Michael, can you talk to us a little bit about yourself as well as the company you represent today?
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Vadi, and I'm representing Lexmark today. A little bit about myself. I'm originally from New York City, but I've lived in Lexington for about 6 years. I hold a bachelor's and master's degrees in accounting from a school in Massachusetts called Bentley University. It's pretty small, not nearly the size of UK. But I do have a master's degree also in data analytics from Penn State, so a little bit bigger, a little bit different of a pace, as you might imagine. I'm also a certified public accountant and a member of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, although I am not a practicing CPA at this point. I'm currently employed at Lexmark, and really I have two different roles. One is I manage our global financial planning and analysis team, and the second is I manage our investor relations group. From a global financial planning and analysis, so if you think of Lexmark, we produce printers and then we produce cartridges that go into the printers so that you can keep on printing. And so my team has global functional responsibility over analyzing the financial performance of our annuities or supplies cartridge business. And really what that means is we have 5 employees here in Lexington to help coordinate the worldwide activities, but we also have responsibility across the globe in terms of the performance of our annuities business. We have individuals on my team who sit in Geneva, Switzerland. We have individuals in Singapore and the Philippines, in Brazil and Mexico, and other locations. Also on my other job, so we talk about investor relations. Many of you may not know, but in 2016, Lexmark did get acquired by a consortium of Chinese investors. And so what I act as a primary liaison between our investors and identifying financial and other targets and strategies, and then trying to make that really concrete and tangible here at Lexmark and making sure that we're able to achieve our goals. So there's not a day that really goes by that I don't have any sort of international engagement or conversation or anything like that. I will say Lexmark has 10,000 employees across 170 different countries. And most of our employees are not sitting here in Lexington or here even in the US. And so it is a very global organization. And that's what makes it kind of fun and exciting to be employed here.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, Karen, and Michael, for those wonderful introductions. They really do give us a sense of who our esteemed panelists are today, and also the companies that you are representing. And it's very exciting to hear a little bit about their global footprint. And that actually is the first question that we have for you. Could you talk a little bit more, maybe in a few more details about your company's global footprint? And I'll just say, Brian, on one day I went for a walk in Bangalore, India, and I was very surprised to see a massive Alltech facility. And so there was a name that I knew from Lexington, represented in one of India's largest cities. So maybe we could go around, starting with Brian again, on the global footprint of these 3 companies.
Yeah, that's funny, Sue. I did the same thing for I guess, my honeymoon. My wife and I went to South Africa, and we drove by Stellenbosch, South Africa, on something totally unrelated, going on a wine tour, and we passed an Alltech office. So yeah, you're never too far from an Alltech office. We have we're in 120 plus countries, and we have specifically 80 different offices. And I think from a global perspective, the owner and founder of Alltech, Dr. Piers Lyons, he's an Irish American. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he founded the company after coming to the US from Ireland in the 1970s. And so from the very beginning, the company was built with very entrepreneurial roots, but right along with that, very strong Irish American roots. Totally as an aside, I came from a meeting just before this for what we were talking about, what Alltech was doing for St. Patrick's Day. So the true global nature of Alltech's Irish roots run through and through. And so we have our main kind of points of our key offices would be in Brazil, our headquarters here in Nicholasville, Kentucky, which I think is very significant to having such a large company in the agricultural space in central Kentucky. So we have our office here, but then we also have our larger offices in Dunboyne, Ireland, just outside of Dublin, and then Beijing, China. So those are kind of our main focal points globally, and kind of the robust global nature of our company.
Thanks, Brian. That does give us a picture. Karen, what about Yum Brands? It seems like Kentucky Fried Chicken is known all over the world.
That's what I was going to say. If you've traveled anywhere in the world, you've probably been to our KFC. And depending upon where you were in the world, when you went to that KFC, you may have noticed that there are some menu items that are the exact same and some that are completely different and inherent to the culture within the country that it's located in. So yeah, so we have offices all over the United States. We have Kentucky, which is where I'm located, Texas, Chicago, Florida, and California. But we actually also have about 13 to 15 different global offices as well. KFC is our largest global brand, with Pizza Hut coming in a close second. And depending upon the culture that you're in or the country that you're in, Pizza Hut can actually be considered fine dining. We're talking white tablecloths and everything. So it really does give us a unique lens into the different countries that we operate in. We are actually a heavily franchised organization. So we were spun off from Pepsi back in 1997. At the time, just the three brands we were Tricon, but then grew, took on some brands, sold them, have since acquired some more. And then 2016, we spun off our largest country, which was Yum China. So they are now our largest franchisee. We are heavily franchised. Only 2% of the restaurants, no matter which brand it is, that you see out on the street is going to be owned by us as a company. But we do rely heavily on those franchise partnerships globally and supporting them both from financial and operational standpoints as well. Yeah, so I partner with all of our countries because we are always looking for talent. The CEO prior to David Gibbs, who is our current CEO, was from Australia, actually. We have a lot of our global leadership team from Pakistan, from South Africa, from the UK, because we are a global organization and we do believe in growing our talent, throughout that organization, which I think is very apropos to what we're talking about today. So hopefully that gives a little bit of lens.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think it is very interesting when you travel to visit a KFC, for example, and see the differences as you noted. Michael, what about your life? Sounds like you're definitely globally engaged every day.
Yes, yeah. As I mentioned earlier, Lexmark is a very global company. Most of our employees are not located here in the United States. Just to reiterate, we have about 10,000 employees scattered across the world, and we participate in over 170 countries. And I just did in terms of where our major offices are. So our worldwide headquarters and North America headquarters is in Lexington, Kentucky. And we're pretty large. We employ about 1,000 people here in the city. We also have a headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland for our Europe and for our Europe operations. Singapore is for our Asia Pacific operations, and Buenos Aires is for our Latin America operations. We also have big shared service centers where a bulk of our employees actually sit. We have a big shared service center in the Philippines. We have one in Budapest, and then we also have one in Buenos Aires. And then we have sales offices all across the world, with some of our biggest ones being in Germany, France, Mexico, and scattered here across the US. And we also do a majority of our manufacturing globally as well. So we have major facilities in Juarez, Mexico, as well as in China. And so yeah, so you can see our landscape is, we're pretty scattered around. Again, we have to engage each other a lot and talk to each other. A lot of our processes are worldwide processes. I did look though, just while everyone was talking, and we do currently have 300 jobs open, and only 80 of those jobs are here in the US. So as you can see, a lot of jobs, and a lot of them are scattered all across the entire world. So just to give you an idea of our location.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is awesome. I feel like many of you touched on the next question in some of your responses, but I'm really interested to hear why global perspectives are critical to being successful in Kentucky's workforce today. And I don't know, maybe we can start with Karen, because I know you talked a little bit about in your response how you have a home location right here in Kentucky for KFC. So do you mind talking to us a little bit about that question?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. And I think kind of, I think regardless, I think there are certain things that are important from a global aspect. So as I think about you know, a global perspective, even though we did start as a US-based organization, so much of our business is done internationally. And so I think it's good to have those perspectives as well. And because so much of our leadership team and just our employees all over the world, you know, we intertwine and interchange talent throughout. When I think about global perspectives, I think it's really being cognizant of what's happening out in the world and the impact that that has on businesses, period, and then specifically for our particular industry. So for Yum Brands itself, you know, don't think anyone has to know that COVID has hit every business really hard in the past 2 years. But when you're a restaurant company in certain locations where everything has just been completely shut down, we have to have that lens into what's happening in the environment globally to understand how that's going to impact our business. So that was just a very, I know it's an easy example, but what it allowed us to do is see how the world was adjusting to COVID as we knew that it was making its way to the United States. So we could then adapt our business measures to handle what's going to happen to our supply chain, what's going to happen to our sales, making sure that our employees are safe. When COVID hit India very, very roughly last year, how are we supporting those employees on the ground? Because even if they are not a true employee, if they're an employee of our franchisee, we still consider them one of ours and want to make sure that they are protected. So I think that within any realm, I think it's really important just to have that global lens and understanding that the world is so much bigger than just what we have here and how that can impact, you know, your business overall, no matter what it is.
And Karen, you are so right. I think that's something probably all of us can relate to, is really looking at how the world had to respond to COVID. And that was just different in so many ways, but at the same time, we were all doing it together. So I really love that example. Michael, what do you think about global perspectives and why it's important to Kentucky?
Sorry, I almost forgot to go off mute. As I mentioned earlier, a significant percentage of Lexmark's business is done internationally, right? And so when you have to think about how you're running a business and to be a better business person, you really have to understand some of the global aspects of what's happening out there in the world, right? Even things simple as Chinese New Year and how that can have a significant impact on our operations and what we're doing. How we go about planning what we're going to manufacture, where we're going to manufacture, how early we need to get components. Those are all being driven based upon these global perspectives, right? These cultural things that are happening that we need to have a great understanding of, because it could have a significant impact on our business. Part of my job, right, is to model and forecast out demand for our cartridges. And that was significantly impacted as it relates to COVID. And it was different all across the world. So very quickly, I would see big drop-offs in certain countries and cities and other areas. And I would say, I wonder what's going on there. And all of a sudden you would go and you would see that there's major outbreaks there, right? And so understanding what's happening in the world and what's going on really translates directly into how our business is performing. And so it's really, really, really important. I would say the best business people here at Lexmark are people who have real good understanding of what's happening out in the world. They're curious about other cultures and those types of things. So I think it's very important, Trisha, to answer your question.
No, I think that is a really good point. And our knowledge and understanding of global events is extremely important to the work that we do. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Bryan, can you talk to us a little bit about your company and how global perspectives are important to Kentucky workforce?
Absolutely. You just, as I said a little bit prior, our owner and founder, Pierce Lyons, was and is an Irish American. And so, he very much came from this global mindset. And I think there were two things that came from that. I think it was one that Michael hit on and one that Karen hit on. And I think, what Michael said is, we need to be curious of what's going on in every region. That basically having a global mindset is kind of a basic point of entry for Alltech, but I think any company in Kentucky now, that no company is going to be insulated from outside influences, just like COVID, for example. So I think the point that Michael made on being curious is key and is very relevant to Alltech. But then secondly, what Karen said is that no one market, we'll just say, Kentucky does not have like a monopoly on all the good ideas there are. We have to really learn and adapt from what we're seeing in other countries. And I think even to Michael's point on like some of the forecasting that's going on is, as we see one product selling really well in one region, maybe there's something we can take to the US and tweak just a little bit to have it fit our market. And then we can really have a lot of success with that, and not thinking that Kentucky or the US, for that point of view, is the only space that can have either innovation or good and new ideas. Looking at the global market and seeing how ideas can be adapted are critical to our success at Alltech.
Those are wonderful examples, I think. And thanks each of you for those responses. I'm going to combine the next two questions, I think, because we haven't got that much time. We want to hear from you. So these questions are to do with how students can prepare themselves to be competitive in a global workforce, and specifically what kinds of skills and what kinds of competencies do you most value relative to your company's work in international settings? So Michael, would you like to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, I could take the first pass at it. To me, again, when you have a global workforce and you're working on major projects and deliverables, communication is so key in order to be able to deliver, right? And so when you're working with a diverse workforce from different countries, people who speak different languages and have a lot of different experiences than you, in different time zones with different working habits and different cultures, you need to communicate early, you need to communicate often, and you need to make sure you never assume that something was fully understood in the way that you necessarily intended it, right? And so to me, I found that, being more intentional about documenting what was being discussed and making sure that you have a clear list of to-dos, those types of things are always been very helpful for me to make sure that not what I'm saying is being heard, but also understood, and that we're going to all drive to the same result. And so communication, I think, is so critical. Teamwork and collaboration kind of goes hand in hand with that, right? So I think our world is too complex for one person to sit in a room by themselves and draft up some amazing solution, right? It's about diversity of perspectives, diversity of thoughts. Good ideas are all over the place, right? And so how do you channel those in an efficient manner to get a better solution? And then the only other thing I would talk about is just a little bit about cultural awareness and emotional intelligence, right? Getting an understanding of what everyone is going through, asking questions, being curious. I think that has a direct business impact, but I also think it helps people feel more comfortable with you. They get to know you a lot better. And that builds the network, right? So when you do have an issue, you can say, hey, what is going on in Brazil? Why are we seeing X, Y, and Z? And you feel like you have someone in your network that you can leverage to do some of those things. So to me, communication, teamwork, collaboration, emotional intelligence, cultural awareness, those are all significant skills and competencies that are necessary in order to operate and thrive in a multinational company.
Yeah, I saw Karen nodding as you were talking there, Michael. Karen, what do you think are the key skills and competencies?
I mean, I just wanted to say ditto, like yes to all of that. That was the perfect answer. And I think communication is key, and that can't be said enough. I think the other aspect that Michael touched on at the very end was understanding the cultural norms and what's important, not just from how that's going to drive your business, but as you're working to build these partnerships and these relationships on a global scale. It's really important to understand, Chinese New Year is super important. If there's a project I'm working on and I have to look at that time frame and Chinese New Year falls in that's not just like a day or a couple days. That's a week-long, if not longer, celebration. Same with a lot of the Jewish holidays in Israel. So I think it's just understanding and having that realization that other countries have these cultural norms that are just as important to them and how that can impact you. But I think that the best way for me that I've had success in building those relationships, because I can tell you at Yum Brands, most everything gets done when you've built the relationship with somebody, even on a global scale. And that takes time. But I think communication is absolutely key. And I think a lot of times, even within the United States, we assume that people are, we're speaking the same language, and we're not. And so I think that, yes, everything that Michael said was absolutely true. I think there's, having patience and building those relationships and understanding those communications are really important as well. But I mean, I think he pretty much nailed that answer.
All right, Bryan, anything to add here? Or?
I'll try to add something, but I think, Michael and Karen hit on, I think, the biggest thing, which is communication. Someone who can communicate clearly, particularly in the written sense. I think, Michael, you touched on that. Someone who can say, hey, this is what we discussed, but let's put this down, because I think as you're dealing with people who may not have English as a first language, there's a really big difference between hearing, then understanding, and then being able to deliver on that. So I think, again, that's first and foremost. And then secondly, this is just a little bit of a reiteration, but treating people the way they would like to be treated as it relates to their holidays, to their traditions, how they like to be communicated with. I think there's just an easy understanding within our American culture that is the way it is, and that's just not true. So I think one thing I guess I'll add to that is, when you talk about developing global perspectives, at least from a study standpoint, my path to marketing in the role that I have now was not very linear. So in university, I studied economics and Spanish. Those are my 2 undergraduate degrees. And then once I started working at Alltech, I realized I needed to have a little bit more technical savvy, and got a master's in agriculture. And so all that took me somehow to the world of marketing. And so I think when you talk about these global perspectives, things aren't always linear in your trajectory and in your career path. And so for me, being flexible to that and understanding that things may change, and staying flexible and staying adaptive has been really important to me to continue to grow. And I think those of us who get set in our ways and say, this is the bit of knowledge I have, and I'm not going to grow beyond that, don't continue to grow in their career. And so having a lifelong learner perspective has been, I think, particularly important as it relates to global perspectives.
Bryan, I think you did a phenomenal job segueing to our next question. So you must be reading our minds. But the next question was actually related to what type of experience do you think our students could pursue to get this global perspective orientation? What is it they could do to achieve some of these skills? And maybe we'll start with Michael. Is that okay?
Yeah, I can take a first pass. There are a million different things I think that people can start to get a global perspective. One is just reading the news or browsing the internet, doing quick Google searches or something like that. I know one of my landing pages, it has holidays for different countries, and it's maybe just taking a second to go and read about that holiday and see what that's about, right? I think that people can join, these different culture nights and different culture shows, and join a student club. Take one of your international friends out to dinner. Just ask them about what their life is like and what their experiences have been. Some of this could be very simple, right? Just to be curious and ask questions. I personally, when I was in school, I studied abroad for a semester, and I thought it was a super valuable experience for me in the sense that I had never been abroad before I had gone on this trip. And I learned so much in terms of how similar we all are, but also the differences, right? And I also learned how it felt to be uncomfortable in a place where I'd never really felt that way, in a sense, right? I was dealing with money that I was not familiar with, and I was doing calculations in my head. I was dealing with jet lag and not always speaking, not always being in a place where English was the spoken language, and trying to read signs, and just feeling that uncomfortableness, right? And getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and saying it's okay. I think it creates someone who's more resourceful, more agile, more flexible, all things that I think are very relevant in a global setting. So, these cultural experiences, being curious, potentially doing a study abroad trip, those types of things, I think are all very valuable ways that people can get experiences.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Michael. I always talk about my experience as an undergrad, and I did not study abroad. And it is one thing I regret and wish I would have done. And so hearing your experience really does encourage me. It's not too late. It may not do it as an undergrad, but it's not too late to take a trip. So thank you so much for sharing that. Bryan, do you mind taking a stab at that question as well?
Yeah, so much, Michael. I did have a chance to do a study abroad when I was in university. And for me, just as a person, as kind of a young adult in that moment, it was extremely impactful. I remember my study abroad was in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I was trying to learn Spanish. And I remember there was kind of this do or die day where it was 95 degrees. I had gone through all the clothes that I owned. Everything I had was dirty. And I needed to find a way to a laundromat. And there was just like this moment of tension, like, I got to find a way to speak Spanish and find the directions to this laundromat, or I'm going to be stinky and dirty for the next 5 months. And so I think you put yourself in these situations where you need to grow, you need to be adaptive, but you have to challenge yourself. And I think for me, just kind of calling it what it was, I was from Kentucky. I'm a white middle class male, and I normally sat in the dominant culture of many situations. When you go to Argentina, you're not in the primary culture, you don't speak the language. There are these situations where you say the wrong thing or you feel foolish, and you're able to have more kind of compassion and understanding for those who may not have English as their first language, or may not understand what's going on. And so I think as that then translates to the work I do at Alltech, it's about being able to ask maybe one further question, or when someone doesn't understand something, having just another second to be like, hey, no, let's understand this and really kind of get to the bottom of what's going on. Because sometimes it's language, but sometimes it's culture. And sometimes there's just things going on in people's personal lives that you get to drill down into as you develop those relationships and see different situations. So, the way I see that is applying itself at Alltech is you have people with really good technical skills, and then you have a need to apply what I'll call kindergarten skills. And if you can have someone who can ask things like, can you help me? Or I'm sorry, I was wrong. Or can you do this? Or can we share? But they have technical skills. To me, those are the employees that I work with that are most valuable. They get good technical skills, but they can treat each other with I'll say good kindergarten skills of being kind, being compassionate, and sharing with others. And so I think those global perspectives are extremely helpful in that way.
I feel like I really love this theme that I'm seeing from both of your answers, which is being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and putting yourself in those spaces. I really love that. Karen, can you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I can. And I am much like you, Trisha. I did not study abroad. I don't even want to age myself, but that really wasn't a thing when I was in college. So, but I have traveled internationally as an adult. And it's definitely that. I think one of the things that when Bryan was speaking, I was thinking is that level of resiliency that you have to have when you're just like that. You're in a country that you don't speak the language and they don't care that they don't speak your language, but you have to navigate, just basic things. And so then you take that and you apply that resiliency. And I think it's also being the lifelong learner and just being wanting to grow and understand. And so I think that that's super helpful. I don't know that I'm gonna be able to add more than what they've already done because they're really good at answering questions.
Yeah, these are fantastic answers. And actually, the next question we had written down has to do with this kind of almost like soft skills, the things that you learn from reflecting about your experiences when you're a stranger in a new place and trying to find your way around and get your laundry done or read a sign or whatever it is. So, if we think about those things, we've talked already about being flexible, being adaptable. What other kinds of ways can we capture some of these skills that perhaps, or these experiences that maybe studying abroad or some kind of intercultural encounter can give our students? What would be some other skills that we can think of? Who would like to take a stab at that?
I can say I can go first since the other
Karen,
gone first. I'll go first. I do think that it's really important. When I said in the very beginning, I'm responsible for an internship program, and I think that that's one of the ways to do it because I think we tend to assume that in order to get global experience, you have to go travel globally, but not all of us necessarily have the means to do that. But you can still go. I mean, the 3 companies that we have here all have really large global footprints. So whether it's doing a co-op or an internship with these companies and understanding that there's not necessarily one track in learning that's going to get you more globally situated. As I think about the various functions that I partner with or projects that I've worked on at Yum, there are so many different avenues that all have a global landscape, whether it's legal and understanding, compliance on a global level or tax or HR in recruiting. So there are just so many different things, marketing, As I think about the brands that we have and, all the countries that they're located in. So there's not just one track that's like, oh, I'm going to do this field of study or get this degree because I want to be global. There are opportunities to get global experience all over the place and in many different industries, but then also in many different countries. And one of the things that when we look at bringing new talent into the organization from like a full-time perspective, not necessarily internship, is do they have experience with other global companies? Because that will help them understand how our global dynamic is set up as well versus coming from just maybe a smaller US based company. It's going to be harder for them to make that transition. Not that it's not possible. We just want to make sure that they have a great learning curve. So I think there's a myriad of different ways that you can get that global scale without actually having to travel, although traveling globally is also fun. So
yeah, I think what an excellent point you're making, Karen. It's one that I think many of us at the university knew already, and then when COVID hit, it was reinforced because we had students doing virtual internships, we had students actually studying abroad virtually. We even had a virtual health brigade where health professional students were engaged with a clinic in Ecuador. So I think we do think sometimes the global is way out there and it's something you have to get on a plane to experience, but actually there's a number of ways to have a global experience, as it were, closer to home. So yeah, thank you for raising that. Bryan, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, because I think you talked about these kind of different cross-cultural skills, and I think one way I kind of think about how that works at Alltech is we have what I'll call it cross-cultural interests. So during COVID, a bunch of us were runners. I grew up playing soccer, so I wouldn't really call myself a runner, but I run because there's a group of us who have a group on Strava, which is just a running app that you can see and track each other's runs. And I think from a cross-cultural kind of connection standpoint, that gave us another point of interest to say, hey, we're not just talking about this specific project at work, but I can say, wow, you ran really fast, or hey, you ran by this great park. And it just created some cross-cultural connections that I think are really relevant. So I think one point I want to make is just that as you develop cross-cultural skills, you may want to develop some cross-cultural activities. If it's an interest in a sport, if it's an interest in a hobby, yes, there's very like local niche things, but sometimes like my friends in France don't care about UK basketball, which I'm shocked. I don't understand that myself. But if you can find an activity like running or a global soccer team, there's more interesting connections you can have, and so you can develop relationships. So that's first going to be cross-cultural activities. Second skill as it relates to cross-cultural functions would be deciding as a team what words like soon and today and like how different vocabulary translates. And what I mean by that is across different cultures, like when someone says, hey, I'll take that on, that may mean one thing in one culture, or hey, I'll get that done soon, that may mean something in a different culture. So in your team defining what we'll consider very basic words mean is extremely important to cross-cultural kind of team success. And then thirdly, and this kind of goes right along with that, is deciding how decisions get done in advance. So you come into a meeting and you say, hey, we need to get to this endpoint, but how are we going to come to agreement on something? Is it going to be, hey, there's one lead and they make the decision? Are we voting on this? Like, how do we agree what's the next step on something? Because I think when you talk about cross-culture, when people don't know what the path is on how a decision gets made and there's ambiguity, you all of a sudden have people who either get steamrolled or don't speak up when they need to. And I've seen that play out a multitude of times. So having a process for how decisions get made, have definitions for what certain words and terms mean, and have cross-cultural activities that you share, I think are all three really important things.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. Yeah. Michael.
The Karen and Bryan hit most of my points. So, and one thing I just want to expand on, Bryan, that he was saying was just different working styles in different places and different ways of making decisions and expectations on that, I think is very critical, and something that I think I underestimated it when I kind of came into the workforce and started working in multinational companies. I always think of one time I was working with some of my Filipino colleagues, and I sent an email and said, hey, can you do X, Y, and Z? And then they received the email and thought they needed to drop everything that they were doing and then work on that solely until they accomplished the task. And it needed to be 100% completed. They waited all night in order to do this task. And that was never going to be my expectation or my intent of when I initially sent it, right? And so understanding how cultures work or how they interpret some of these, the directions and those types of things really kind of is very critical. And I think of things like decision-making. Here, at least in Lexington, it's a very flat organization. Decision-making lies in all aspects of the organization. It's not super hierarchical. Whereas in some other countries, it is meant and expected to be somewhat hierarchical, right? And so there's just all these nuances in terms of working and working in different areas that you need to consider. And it's somewhat of a learning, right? It's somewhat kind of an experience. But to me, it makes a big difference. And so it's something to be aware of as you're kind of entering the workforce or engaging in some sort of global engagement or international experience.
Thank you so much for that. As I'm listening to everyone speak, you all are giving us some really, really good examples and skill sets that many of our students should absolutely strive to achieve. As you think about all the things that we discussed here, is there one critical thing, one critical experience, one critical skill set that you believe our students should pursue in preparation for a career that involves international work? Who would like to take a stab at that? Bryan, I saw your.
Yeah, I'll go on this, and I think maybe this will give Karen and Michael something to go off of. But I think the skill that seems time and time again to be most winsome is being willing to shoot your shot. And what I mean by that is just going for it. And I think all of us have this maybe voice in our head that makes us feel like an imposter, that we're not worthy, we don't have the skill set to do this. Oh man, this person is so much more blank than I am. And I think if there's one skill that I've tried to hone is to shoot your shot. And you may not win, you may not succeed, you may not be the right person for every opportunity, but if you're willing to put yourself out there and give your best stab at something, you may find yourself successful more times than not, or you'll get clear feedback that, hey, you're not the right person for this and someone else is a better fit. Maybe even just a quick example of how I got hired at Alltech. I was living in Lexington at the time, and I saw a copy of the Lane Report magazine, and I saw a gentleman, Jorge Gattuso. He was featured in there as an Alltech employee that was from Chile, and he had come to the US and was working at our office. And I said, he seems really cool. He seems like the kind of person I'd want to be. Let me just email. And I couldn't find his exact email, but I made up 5 or 6 different attempts to what I thought his email could be, like Jorge.Gattuso at Alltech, J.Gattuso at Alltech. And I ended up finding it. And I said, hey, in short, you seem really cool. I want a job like yours. How do I do that? And he said, meet me at the Latin Fest in downtown Lexington, and we'll talk about it. And I just remember getting to meet him at the Latin Festival in downtown Lexington. Him telling me how to get my resume all put together and get it turned into Alltech, and ended up getting an internship out of the whole deal. But I just knew that if I didn't shoot my shot, I'd put my resume in at Alltech a couple times before, and it hadn't worked out until I had that connection. So I had someone who I'd actually networked with. And for me, it didn't work out every time, but sometimes you shoot your shot and it comes out favorable. And at least for me, that was one skill that I think is extremely important to being successful in today's global workforce.
Thank you. I love that. Shoot your shot. Really important. If you take nothing else, I really think that is a great piece of advice and something that even myself needs to practice more. I really appreciate that. Karen, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I would, because actually I'm going to piggyback off what Bryan said. And I think that what we call that here at YAM is we call it owning your own career, that you're intrinsically motivated, that you are the one driving your career. You're not just sitting back and waiting for somebody to come and say, hey, we've got this great opportunity, but you're willing to do whatever that needs to be, whether it's a short-term assignment or a stretch assignment, whether that's within the US or globally, or just learning new and different things. So when we started off the conversation at the very beginning, I said I graduated from the University of Kentucky, and I did, with an accounting degree, but I'm in recruiting. And I tell people I've been with the company for 17 years, not because one, they are just a great company to work for, but I've been able to change my career path based on what I wanted to do, not because what the company necessarily told me I needed to do. And I think that's extremely important, is that yes, if there's something that you're interested in, somebody you want to meet, I tell people all the time, reach out and have the conversation. Very rarely will you be told no, because the person you're reaching out to is appreciating the fact that you're taking that step forward and actually reaching out to them. One of the first people that I really got to know on a deeper level was James Fripp, I should say. He's our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at Yum. And I walked by his office one day, and this was years ago. I mean, we're talking like 5-10 years ago. When diversity and inclusion wasn't even really a conversation you had or something you talked about. And I stopped by his office and I said, "Hi, I'm Karen. I have no idea what you do, nor how it impacts us on a business level." And he was like, "Sit down, let's chat." And we chatted for 45 minutes, and I'm still really close with him. So I think it's just the ability of having that hunger and that drive and being willing to take that risk. Because 9 times out of 10, people are going to appreciate it more than they're going to be annoyed by it. And it's just going to be a betterment because it helps you learn. And maybe you're not the right fit for whatever that opportunity is that you want, but at the same time, you'll gain some self-awareness and maybe even some feedback on what you need to do to put yourself in the right path.
I love that. Love that. Absolutely love it for so many reasons. Michael, I saw your head nodding and your mic unmuted. So something you would like to share, I'm sure, add to that question?
No, you both hit on kind of what I was going to touch on about, owning your career and those types of things. The only thing I would add to that is just because you're in a current role and you have day-to-day responsibilities doesn't mean that you don't have any ability to kind of craft your own job and your own role and your own experiences, right? Every single role I've had, I've done it completely and utterly differently than the past person who had done it, right? And I've decided what I needed to get done and did that piece. But then also you can decide what you're passionate about, what value you think you can bring to the table, and what value you think you can add. What experiences do you want to get, and what skills do you want to hone, and make sure that that's an integral part of the job that you have today. And so just because you have a job does not mean that here are 27 different roles and responsibilities and tasks you have to execute. There is a part of that, but you also have an ability, at least I've seen it here at Lexmark, is you have an ability to craft what you want your job to be and what you want your experience to be. And I think that's really important from a development standpoint, especially for younger individuals who are just coming into the workforce, and those types of things. And the only other thing I would add, and I think you both touched on this, is the power of networking. It's not always what you know, but sometimes it's who you know. And so, get out there, be curious, ask questions. No one is ever going to say, "Oh, that person asks," they ask all these questions and it's not out of their responsibility. Why are they being nosy? No one will ever say that, right? And so people like to talk about what they do. People like to provide information and like to provide guidance and those types of things. And so don't be shy to ask. Don't be shy to say, "I don't understand this," or "What are you doing here?" Or "Why did you do that?" Because I think that builds a network of individuals who are going to be in your corner. And so I think the power of networking and job crafting are also two big things to keep on your radars.
So this is awesome advice, I think, and it kind of gets at something that one of our attendees has asked in the Q&A. So I'm going to relay that person's question, I don't know their name, to you as panelists and see what you think. So the person says that many students from different cultural backgrounds may have been taught to be humble and not brag about themselves. And so the person says, could the panelists talk about ways to effectively market oneself on a job market or in a workplace, perhaps when that's been your upbringing, to be cautious about being perceived as not being humble, or about, to be very cautious about perhaps being seen as being too boastful, or as boastful. So, what kind of advice would you give for folks who are in that position? Anyone? Karen? Karen's unmuted. All right.
I will be the brave soul that will take that one. Okay, so you're gonna have to give me a second just to think. And I think that that's inherently very true. I think that a lot of cultures are said, like, you can't show up as your true self at work. You have to put yourself within this mold, and that's the mold that you need to show up within. And I think that one of the things, at least at Yum, that we're trying to do is help people understand those different dynamics to all the conversations we had at the very beginning of this panel of understanding cultural norms and differences and, just being a learner. I think for the individuals, I think that there's and I say this and I get that, I didn't grow up in this manner. But I would say when I'm talking to candidates that want to come in, like, I want to hear what you've done that is applicable to whatever role it is that you may want at this company. You are selling yourself. I don't think that that's necessarily being boastful or bragging or anything like that. But we as recruiters, we have to know that you can do the job and that you bring certain skills to the table. And so if you have whatever experiences that is, to bring those forward, then I want to hear about them. Now, I think that, maybe when you're in a company, if you constantly talk about all the great things you've done, I can see that people might think like, okay, well, all they do is talk about themselves. But I think from, whether it's getting an internship, a co-op, a full-time job, we need to hear that because it's the ones that I'm like, well, it's really great. His resume or her resume read very well. But when I was talking to them, I really couldn't get anything out of them. You're selling yourself, and there's no better salesperson for you than you. So I would say, to bring that forward. But I can also understand where from culturally that can be really hard to go against that mindset. And so it's just that kind of internal self-talk that, you're doing this for your own betterment. And sometimes that can be really hard, but it goes back to the resiliency and kind of the bravery that we've kind of talked about in these different aspects throughout the conversation.
Yeah, a bit of bravery. Yeah, that's very, very nice advice. Yeah.
Sue, can I maybe add one thing to that? I think Karen brought on some really good points, and she gave me a second to think. I think two points. One being, if you're doing and bringing excellence to a role,
Bryan, I think you're freezing up there. I think Bryan has frozen up. Michael, would you like to keep us going and hopefully Bryan won't be offended?
I'm sure what he was going to say was going to be very enlightening. So we'll hear back from him in a second. But yeah, one thing I just wanted to say is sometimes I think the initiative that you take in your role and being able to go above and beyond your roles and responsibilities, to me, speaks everything about you. It is in and of itself a marketing mechanism for yourself, right? And so when I see someone and I see that they're working hard, but also doing things that aren't necessarily part of their day-to-day, they're going above and beyond, they're asking questions, they're asking to help on things that maybe isn't in their realm. To me, that shows that someone is really effective and leaves a good impression on me. And I would also say is you need to find advocates in an organization in order to advocate for you, right? If you don't feel comfortable necessarily advocating for yourself, then you need to make sure that you align with people who are going to advocate for you. And when you're not in the room, they can talk about how great of a job you're doing, right? And so those are two things that I think kind of, I guess, get away from the boastfulness or the bragging, but also can get you the recognition that you deserve.
Thank you so much, Michael. I feel like we're cutting really close up to time. And so, my last final question is related to what is that one piece of advice that you want to give our students who are listening today? I hope Bryan can join us and share in that response. Michael, I saw your mic unmute. Do you want to get us started?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think we've given a lot of kind of points around advice and how you can thrive in a multinational corporation. To me, the fact that Karen and Bryan and myself all stressed communication as being so critical, I think it's one of those things that you hear it enough and it sounds very cliche, but it is so important in terms of being able to navigate this complex environment, in this complex world, complex business operations, to make sure that you have clear lines of communication. So if there's one thing, and it's one thing that I wish I could go back, 10, 15 years, it's just making sure you're very intentional with how you develop your communication skills, because it'll pay dividends throughout your entire career.
Thank you so much, Michael. Bryan, you were in mid-sentence, so I want to give you the opportunity to come back to your response if you remember what you were going to say. If not, the question that we asked, or the last final question was, is there any last words or final advice you would like to give?
Yeah, apologies. My computer chose a great time to crash. I'm working on this thing all day. It gets tired too, so I apologize, but thanks for your patience. Real quick, the only point I was going to make as you're trying to sell yourself is sometimes it's not maybe comfortable to speak to a large audience, but if you can find a trusted peer or someone within your team or a manager and go to them directly and say, hey, here are the skills I think I'm really good at. I'd like to grow within the company. I think that goes a long way. And then thirdly, asking, where are my blind spots? Sometimes it doesn't have to be to a mass audience, but going to someone who you trust within the company and saying, here's how I'm trying to grow, can be really advantageous if you're apprehensive about kind of showcasing your skills to a larger audience. So 3 things as kind of takeaways. Michael touched on one of them as I was just joining, and it can't be told enough. Learn how to write well. The importance of written communication is as imperative as ever. If that's an email, if that's even a chat within a team, clear communication is winsome communication and just goes a really long way. Second thing, and this goes to some other themes, but at least for me, it was to try to learn a second language. And the reason I recommend that is just because of all the ways that it stretches you as a person to be in a situation where you may not be comfortable, where you may be in a minority group in a way that you've not been before. And I think that ability to learn a second language just builds a ton of compassion among folks. And then the third thing I just touched on before is shoot your shot. You never know how far or how long you can go down a certain path until you really give it a go. And if you're not failing, maybe you're not trying hard enough on certain areas. So I think there's just so much exciting things we can do within Yum, within Lexmark, but particularly within Alltech as well. They just don't know until you try it. And it's just an exciting time to be in the workforce and see where that can take us.
Bryan, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Karen, we want to end with you. What would be your last?
All right, I'll round us out here. I do agree, communication is key. I can't tell you the number of resumes that get passed over because we find typos or such. So that seems very logical, but it's also very important, and especially once you get into the organization. So definitely agree on that. I think one of the things that I'm a fan of, I'm not a fan of fake it till you make it. I don't like that philosophy at all, but I am a fan of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if you are pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, then that's when you're really starting to learn and push yourself, and that's going to be recognized. And so going to what Bryan said earlier, like making sure that you're taking those opportunities and putting yourself out there, but also to the last question of making sure that whatever you're doing in an authentic way to yourself. So kind of going along with that, like don't just fake it till you make it, but being authentic to yourself and what you want to get, and then finding those champions that can work with you. So I think if I had to really narrow it down, I would say growth mindset, continuing to learn is so important. Communication is key. And then also another buzzword that I like to use is intrinsic motivation, just being willing to be motivated and do that on your own versus waiting for somebody to hand you the opportunity. I think if you have all of those together, you're on a really great path.
Well, this has been a terrific session. I think that you've offered such great advice and some wonderful information for all the attendees. If the panelists would like to drop their LinkedIn into the chat, I'm not sure if you have or not, it might be helpful for folks who would like to connect with you. But I'll just close by thanking Trisha very much for being co-moderator of this event. It's been a really interesting past hour, and thank you very much to Karen from Yum Brands, to Michael from Lexmark, and to Bryan from Alltech for spending some of their day with us. We really appreciate you. And thank you also to Rachel and others who had a hand in organizing this event and setting everything up. So thank you to everybody. Have a great rest of your day.